Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining tonight for this very challenging and interesting discussion. Apologizes for the delay, but we are a little bit late, but we are on it, and we are very excited to start the discussion. So I'm Federica Braccioli. I'm fifth-year PhD student at the University of Geneva, and I'm here with my second moderator of the night.
I'm Laura, and I'm a fifth-year PhD student at the Graduate Institute in Geneva.
So Laura and I have been working together with the Women in Econ Léman, that is a very young student association, not even 2 years. And we started together this path of trying to understand the situation of women and other underrepresented minorities in our profession. And so we had a few workshop series that helped us, give us a larger awareness of the situation. And thanks to that, we were able to develop personal, small practice that could help us facing the additional obstacles that the profession is putting in front of us. And that's great. It was a great personal discovery. However, we realized that that was not enough.
So we realized that we were dealing with a problem that has a more systemic nature, and we were trying to find solutions that help us as individuals mitigate that situation, but those solutions are never gonna address those systematic issues that are underlying it. So that's why we decided that the initiative should actually push more for institutional solutions. And we've actually started thinking about this this semester by developing some guidelines, which we're currently trying to implement at the Econ department at the Graduate Institute. And we really hope that that will be an initiative that we can also implement in our other partner institutions, like here at the University of Geneva and University of Lausanne. But to give some meat to that discussion, or some tofu, one should say, we invited some experts today, and we're so excited to talk to you about your expertise on the topic. So maybe Fede, you wanna?
So actually this Roundtable is an event that is part of a larger academic conference, Rare Voices in Economics, and we had the honor to have two great economics professors, Professor Emmanuelle Auriol from Toulouse School of Economics that gave a great keynote speech this morning, and Professor Estefania Santacreu-Vasut from ESSEC Business School that will give a keynote speech tomorrow.
And we have Professor Heidi Mirza here with us, who is an expert, among other things, on institutional racism, and a Professor of Sociology, Professor Emeritus at the LSE and the UCL.
Should we? So we had like an introduction speech by the president of CPR, Professor Beatriz Weller Di Mauro, that unfortunately couldn't join us tonight. But we have a short record that she will say a few words to greet us. And actually, she's been following us since day zero, following us and supporting us since day zero. So she really knows all the story since the very beginning.
It's a real pleasure to be able to send this greeting. If I cannot be with you today, it is because I am on my way to another personal meeting, and I am very happy that we are finally in the world where this is again possible. And for you, I am sure this is a very important occasion. Not only have you been able to put together a fantastic program, but it is also an opportunity to network across different institutions, across different parts of this network, and to build relationships, to build lasting, hopefully, friendships, because that's very important. One very important aspect of being a woman in economics, of being a woman in a place where you are likely to be in a minority for a long time, to have others to talk to is definitely one of the big benefits of networks like the ones you've put together. I am full of admiration for the organizers and for all of you who have worked so hard to not only bring this initiative forward initially, but to keep it going and to keep it growing, because that is ultimately the test of time is what is the most important one. Can you not only have an initial push and energy, but can you keep it sustainably going, and also have the vision to approach into new topics and to go further. The program you have in front of you over these 2 days definitely is a testimony to the fact that you and that you have been able to do this. I have had the first occasion of an in-person meeting last week, in fact, in Florence, and I can say that the productivity of these kind of meetings, possibly because we have missed them for so long, are just enormous. And compared to the typical Zoom experience that we have gotten to know so well. Zoom or sleep is, or Zoom multitasking is, as you know, almost a total temptation in a web-based conference or seminar. I would encourage you to use this opportunity also not only to get to know others, but also to get back into the mood of full concentration on the here and now. That is also what in-person is encourages. Now, a small remark in terms of the topic, women in economics, and the experience that I wanted to share with you from my own experience leading CEPR. As you may know, the CEPR fellowship membership is, to a certain extent, very much a true reflection of the profession, and that includes our composition in terms of diversity. And definitely it has meant that at the senior level, at the fellow levels, the number of females at that level has been very, very low. We are talking about 8 to 10% of the whole fellowship not too long ago. Over the course of my own presidency, but even also before with Richard Baldwin, there has been a decided effort to change this. And there was also a large amount of agreement in the leadership, in the academic leadership, those are the program directors, that something needs to be done to increase the number of females. It turned out that it is easier to do so at the level of the affiliates, so the incoming junior level, and that's where the process had been actually leading to every time that we have these appointment committees, and so every year quite a number of the new appointees would be female affiliates. But somehow at the more senior level, that did not seem to permeate into the same numbers. And what we did is, in front of the last appointment round, really put all these numbers in front of the people who were going to be making the decision. That's a committee decision. And to raise this issue once again, we did not actually go all the way to say, there has to be a certain number that needs to be respected. But there was such a high degree of agreement by that time and awareness that the last appointment round actually finally delivered on what we were all hoping to achieve, namely a much, much larger amount of women appointed at the senior level, which is now approaching almost 30%. And that's of course not 50% yet, but knowing how the profession as the base looks like, that is already, I see, as a big achievement. And one sort of so what I'm trying to say here, things are changing, but they don't change by themselves. It needs constant effort. There may also easily be back slipping. And what I've also encountered is that it's not rare for senior female women to be the ones who most openly speak against direct interventions a la quotas. It's not fully surprising that quotas and explicit types of targets are seen skeptically by economists, because we understand what all the negative sides of these interventions are. But it is increasingly, I'm finding that those who argue on the side of this is a necessary step now tend to be male. And that is, on the one hand side, a positive message. On the other hand side, it also shows that it's not easy as a woman, as a senior woman also, to argue in favor of quotas, and many do not do so. So food for thought for you that I wanted to leave you with. The good news is things are actually changing, at least at the EPR. And if you look at the recent crop of senior women who are leading development in basically all international institutions right now, are leading the economics departments, it is definitely a very female group. So right now we have a number of people who are visibly out there and who can push further forward. I do fully expect that all of you in the room today will eventually also be in this position, and I wish you all the best luck, and a lot of fun now for this coming panel and the rest of your conference program. Bye-bye, and see you in person next time.
So that was clearly a very nice and humbling and flattering message. Before we move on, I just wanted to mention that we were supposed to be one more person up here. So Professor Franziska Krings unfortunately could not join us today due to a personal emergency, but I just wanted to mention that we had planned to have her here. She's a professor of psychology at the University of Lausanne and an affiliate of Life Center. And we really hope that we can have this discussion with her another time.
And another last thing, so we have, for those of you who are following us from the Zoom, we have a Q&A, so please, if you have questions, write them down and we will collect them at the end. So I guess we can start with the roundtable. So as I mentioned before, this morning we had a very interesting keynote speech from Professor Auriol about the situation on women in the profession and the persistent gender gap. So Professor Auriol, you also been chair of WINE for a long time, and after you draw a very precise picture of the situation, can you tell us a little bit more of what has been tried in terms of solutions and what worked, what didn't work?
So thank you very much, first of all, both of you, for organizing this fantastic conference, and it gives me a lot of hope. I think this is part of the changing of our profession and taking our own life in our own hand, and that's really important. So congratulations, it's really well done. So about what worked and what done. Sometimes good intention can backfire, and one of them, I was convinced it was a good idea, but it's not. At least it didn't work in the US. It was to share the tenure clock stop when a baby comes equally among partners. And the result of that, unfortunately, has been that the probability of tenure of women has decreased and the probability of tenure of men has increased. So the men use the time to publish more paper, and the women take care of the kids. So the gap increases in publication, and that's not good. It's a relative performance thing. So the first thing is, if a department wants to help young women to succeed in academia, it shouldn't distinguish. It should give the woman a tenure clock break, but not men. Unless, of course, it's a gay couple, or I mean, you have to consider situation. You have to, but this is a very important point. So that's one thing. What work is mentoring. So there has been some evaluation in the US about that. They did a randomized trial, so talking about nothing and mentoring. And the young professional women that were mentored, they did much better in terms of succeeding in academia. And so this is a useful thing to have senior colleagues that help you about how to publish, the strategy, the timing, etc. So that's work. What doesn't work is, here again, a seemingly good idea, which is to say, well, let's have 50% of women in each committee. That's a super bad idea, because since there are so few women in department, it's mean an overburden of committee and wasting time for this woman. And so I know that at some point the president, it's a good idea a priori, say we are going to have 50% of seats in all committee held by women, and one colleague told me, oh, you are going to be in a lot of committee. I say, no, I'm sorry, you didn't hire women, I'm not going to fill all the slot for you. So that's not a good idea. And in the US, again, there are evidence that women spend more time doing public chore than men. Sometimes it's like between 2 and 5 hours a week. So it's a lot of time. That's not a good idea. So a department should put in place mentoring, should protect women. Of course, they have to do their share of public good. Everybody has to, and that's very important. You have to do your share of public good, but you shouldn't do more than you share. One thing also that work, now we have seen this morning that there are inappropriate behavior in seminar. So that is very important to have an official statement about what is appropriate and what is not. So, for instance, at the World Bank, they have this poster in meeting room, and they say it's not okay to interrupt people, it's not okay. And in fact, if you do that, if you are very aggressive, like we can be in seminar in economics, you are looked down and your career is not going to progress very quickly, and even worse, you can be fired. So this is perceived as a professional mistake to be aggressive in meetings, for instance. So, but this is good that the department say, there are appropriate behavior and there are not appropriate behavior. And to say it white on black, I mean to write it on the board and to have poster, it's very, very, very good. So that's work also. I think and yes, and one last point, and I think that's why it was very important what was said before, a role model matters. Also evidence shows that. So if you are a young student and you see no woman in senior position, how can you project yourself as a senior woman one day? I mean, it's very, very hard. And that's also important, so to have to put some pressure. And the last thing also is to have, but it's not necessarily at the department level, but it works very well in society, is to have some collect data, analyze them, and advertise them in newspaper. And because deans, they don't like that, bad publicity. So if an university is doing very poorly, please share the news with media. This is something that should be said. So there are ways to do stuff and to improve situation, but first we need to look carefully, because we can really, on all good faith, do bad stuff in the end.
Thank you so much for these very practical remarks. So we need guidelines, we need accountability, and we need mentors and role models. That's something that's, I guess, not too hard to implement for most departments, I guess. Now I want to direct the next question to Professor Mirza. So we know that there are different systems of exclusion, not only pertaining to gender, but also other characteristics. So if we talk about what makes a space welcoming or what constitutes a safe space, is it enough to have bodies present? Is it enough to have representation? Or what, in your view, constitutes a true safe space?
Well, safe spaces, that's a hot topic in universities. I just want to say that I think this is a safe space. I feel I've really enjoyed the day. Everyone was respectful, diverse opinions. I think that a safe space is somewhere where everybody feels they belong. And the reason that we're even having this conversation is because not everyone feels welcome and belonging in their departments, in their classrooms. And that is if you're a gendered body, a raced body, if you're disabled, we're sexualized in different ways. And when you walk into the room, if you're a white, male, middle-aged man, that is the space where you can just float in and be comfortable. If you're a person of color, and I'm the first woman of color to be a professor in the UK 22 years ago, and I remember going to the first board meeting at the very senior level, and the vice chancellor, who is equivalent to your director, he just turned around and he said he'll have milk and 2 sugars in his coffee. He thought I was the coffee lady because somebody who looks like me embodies that space. And then when I said, no, I have just been made a professor and I'm here in the room, in the board meeting, and he said to me, oh, what does your husband do? So, you know, the different bodies that we have is the barrier to equality. So what we have to do is then rethink the problem, because it isn't our problem. It's the problem of the normalized space of whiteness and white privilege and male privilege, the ease with which they can flow into that space and the dis-ease about our presence there. And I always say that, you know, what works and what doesn't work, one of the things is white allyship. Do you know what I mean by allies? An ally is a friend. Mentors. But in England, it's a hot topic. Who is a white ally? What do you have to do to become a white ally and support those who are in marginal or excluded positions? The reason I got my position was it was a very specific chair, very specific professorship around race equality. And so they wanted someone specific. Now, this position was created by the governor of the university, you know, very senior unpaid governors that sit at the top. And the reason he promoted this position was he had been in the kinder transport. He came to England, escaped the Holocaust, came to England, and he became the head of IBM. And when he retired, he had this position because he had a vision for equality in the university. He was a white ally. He was a true ally, and he took a risk to appoint me. There were white men and men of color who came for the job, and he chose me. And he said the reason he chose me is that he felt that I could communicate across the divides, the class divides, the race divides, the gender divides, and he wanted me to make a lot of money in business. Because race equality and gender equality is about markets, and I've been so impressed today with the discussions that you've had, because, you know, you're looking at behavior and how behavior drives markets. And one thing that has struck me being here in Geneva is the diversity. I mean, I came 10 years ago, and it's changed so much in terms of the ethnic diversity. But also, you know, I can see gay couples and things that I didn't see before. So I just think that white allyship is really important. And the ethics of the way of professionalism, the professions. So if you are a professional academic, What are your ethics? What will you do? What will you give up to support a person of color, to support a woman? I gave a talk, keynotes, I can't remember where, they're all merging. It was on Zoom. And somebody tweeted afterwards and said, I was talking about this question of white allyship, and she tweeted that somebody in her department didn't go for promotion so that she could get that promotion, because the two of them would have gone head and head. So the white woman lecturer did not go for that promotion as head of department, so the woman of color could get that job. She gave up her promotion in order for that change. So that's the kind of question we have to ask our senior leaders, because I think leadership is where it's at. And you asked me the question about representation. It isn't enough to put us in positions, as you eloquently said, you become the doormat. You have to go to every single meeting. You have to talk to all the students with problems. You have to sap up all the emotional energy because you're a woman, while men write their papers and don't cook their dinners. So there is a sense in which leadership has to make the decisions. And just as Edgar Neufeld, this governor who gave me the position, he went out, he got the money, he raised the money. What we need to do is make positions possible. And one of the things that really struck me this morning when the director was talking, he talked about quotas, but he talked about it in relation to lowering standards. And this is also being mentioned just now by...
Welcome to economics.
Huh?
Welcome to economics.
Yeah. And the idea of merit is still a medieval concept at the heart of academia, that you get there by talent, you get there by hard work. So, that it's a level playing field, but it's never a level playing field. And that equal opportunities and affirmative action are somehow pulling standards down. Well, if we've never been in those positions where we can advance, why do we become the problem? It isn't about merit. Merit comes when we're given opportunities to grow and we get positions in which we can flourish. We need brave leadership. So we shouldn't be looking at us and putting us in that position. It's the leadership that needs to change from the very top. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mirza, for this very insightful perspective. Very, very nice. I think then there is one takeaway that we can, well, there are many, but one important takeaway that we can take from your speech is that, so far institutions have been kind of perpetrating inequalities that we have, that we see in the profession. And one of the bottlenecks that the literature as well as identified is the hiring procedure. And hiring procedure is based on performance metric. So it's very difficult once we bring body inside the room if the performance metric is not, it's uncomfortable for them. It's very difficult to evaluate their work accordingly. So I will direct the next question to Professor Santacreu. So how does the culture in economics affect the value that we put forward and performance metrics, and what would be a fair performance metric?
Thank you very much, Federica, for your question, and I liked very much the previous comments. I think this morning we had the keynote speech mention that the topics that underrepresented minorities or women study tend to be different, and they tend to not to be published in the top 5, at least in the last decades. And so I think that's already trying to maybe shift the focus from the top 5 to a broader scope of journals would be an important change in that sense. in terms of discrimination, maybe coming back to some of the things that I've said before, I think it's true that we focus on performance, and we saw this morning also that women tend to publish at a slower pace or a lower number of journals. And then we also talk about their salaries, their wages, career progression. But I think if we go beyond women and we look also at minorities, if you think about discrimination, and I think maybe this links to the space and the safe space, there is a huge cost of discrimination that is hidden. And this cost is something that individuals are going to be bearing and having to, it's sort of, you have to climb from a lower level simply because you may not be able to say no to a proposal because you think, okay, I have to be perfect in all these dimensions simply because a feeling of inadequacy, I think that discrimination brings, and that is deeply rooted. So I think you have to, I think that the focus on salaries, career progression, and so on is very important, but in some sense is the tip of the iceberg. And this morning we had a theater exchange, and we had, and there was a sense of community. And building this sense of community requires culture to change, the culture of economics, but also the culture in society more broadly. And this requires us to self-examine our biases. And I think here, every one of us thinking about, if you are not disabled, how do you think about what would it be for a disabled person? And so one last point, and then I'll stop, but if we think about inclusive HR policies, oftentimes they are going to be made on the way, like, okay, a gay person arrives, so we have to, the person is going to ask for something, and then we're going to be changing the way we look at things. But I think the institutions and academia should be self-examining all the policies, a little bit like with gender mainstreaming in the policy world, where you take every policy that you have, all the language that is involved in it, and you think about, well, how would a disabled person, how would you put yourself in a different situation, and then try to build policies that are inclusive from scratch. It's not that you are vegan and suddenly, okay, they say, you're vegan, okay, we're going to give you some different food. It should be that the vegan option is a default with many other options. I mean, I'm just making an example, but because otherwise you reinforce the feeling that this person is different and that they are going to be asking for something that they have to ask, that is a given for a non-majority person or something. So, thank you.
Thanks a lot. And then I will have a second question for you. So this morning it was mentioned in the keynote why should we care about a large representation of women and other underrepresented minority in the profession? And you have some ongoing research about how gender and other identity can lead to different way of approaching research question. Do you want to say something about that?
Thanks, Federica. Well, not so much. I mean, it's more from the different work I have been doing, but certainly the assumptions we make in economics. I mean, if you think about, there is a journal, the Review of Economics of the Household was created not very long ago, and that's a place where you can look at households, you look at family economics, you look at interactions in the household, and that's was created by Professor Shoshana Grossbard, and is growing in importance and has been important for the analysis of the COVID crisis. But the point is that if you are never on underrepresented situation, or you are not trying to change the assumptions, I mean, assumptions are something that, I mean, sometimes we have simplifying assumptions of our model, sometimes we have key assumptions, but living through the fact that the assumptions that the world makes about you are not the reality means that you're going to approach the models you're going to build at least with some critical view, and maybe you're going to change the assumptions. I think today we had some examples of that in the presentations, but when we think about a couple, for example, or we think about family, now we have more and more data about different family types, so that these type of assumptions are important. And in general, we saw with inequality and COVID. I think we spoke with Heidi before, but that inequality studies were really put forward during the COVID crisis, and certainly individuals or researchers that are interested in those topics are very important, and they often work on those topics because there is also a personal, at least interest or a feeling of relevance for those topics. So we are not in the representative Asian world all the time, everywhere, and so that's, yeah, maybe.
Thank you very much. I have one more question for Professor Mirza. I would like to just ask you about your notion of success and performance, because you said that leadership needs to change, or the view of how we perform and how we can measure good performance. So what do you think would be a more inclusive way of viewing achievements or in terms of hiring?
You mentioned the word performance, and I just want to take a step back and think about all the equality legislation and the policies that we've had. For over 60 years, we've had civil rights and equality legislation, and we have amazing progressive laws about equality and to prevent it. And yet, we still have gross inequalities, and they're not closing. And you mentioned about inequalities in COVID. We are seeing inequalities growing rather than shrinking, which at this point in my career kind of depresses me, and that I'm still talking about the issues of women in academia. So what we say in in sociology, we talk about the performativity, how we perform equalities in our institutions. So we have amazing documents, we have speeches from those on high of all the initiatives that they're having. And these initiatives, I call it, it's like the white heat of activity. There's so many things being done unto us, but yet they're not working. So something is wrong with that system, and it's talking about institutional racism, institutional sexism. It's ingrained in the system. And I was having a chat with somebody earlier in the coffee break about peer review. And peer review in our journals is it's the golden yardstick by how we're measured. And a good journal has tight peer review. But your peer review are your competitors. And they also police the boundaries of our discipline, what's right and what can be said, what can't be said. And they will easily dismiss your work if it's on a topic, that they don't agree with, or that they're competing with you on. So how do you measure success in an unequal world? It's a very difficult thing. Plus, when the systemic structures that we have in academia, for example, mitigate against women's equality. So I have a lot of graduate students, by the time you are doing your PhD, you're probably in your early 30s, maybe 20s, late 20s, early 30s. And you're thinking about a family. You're thinking about, extending the value of your life through family and home and everything, not just because you're a woman or whatever, it's because that's what you do at that point in your life. But that is the point where you have to publish or be damned. And that is the point where you will be judged. So you have to often make a choice. Either you've got a very good partner, or you've got to give it up, or you've got to take maybe a different kind of role, become a teacher in a school rather than in academia because you get holidays or something like that. You have to make all these different decisions. And that is because the structure of academia mitigates against women's trajectory. It values male privilege, but it doesn't value female desires. So it's not our world. and we have to move into this world. And how do we do it? I was saying earlier, like this conference, the papers have been of such a high standard. It just made me think you need to have your own journal. Or do a book collection, but books are not valued in academia because of the peer review system. So these are systemic things that we have to be brave enough. This is why it has to come from leadership in a very kind of system, top way. It's not about just putting us, like I was saying earlier, just us being represented if we can't survive and thrive in that system. And so, yeah. What does success look like? I wouldn't say me, because I actually resigned my job. I resigned because I think it was 10 years ago now, and took early retirement because I was worn down by the competitive nature of my colleagues, the undermining, we're all trying to go for grants, cutting each other out. It was just awful, and it was making me ill. And in fact, I did get ill, and I just thought, don't want to do this anymore. And you have to look at and then the metrics came in, and the bureaucracy clunked up, and I just thought, I can't do my job. I can't enjoy teaching. I can't enjoy research, because the pressures are just too much. And I think they've increased with the metrics now that we have. And I don't think it's necessarily improved standards. So, yeah, I left, and my dear colleague, Sarah Ahmed, who's one of our top women of color, queer philosophers, and if she was a man, you would know who she was, because she's a woman. You never hear of her, but she's a genius, and she's just got a book that came out today called Complaint. And I urge you to get this book, because it's about how our systems actually shut you down. So if you make a complaint that you've been discriminated against for whatever reason, you will be locked into a system that will wear you down until you leave and until you get ill. So, you constantly have to prove yourself. And so the systems around equality legislation is the same. It's performed, but it's impossible for you. And this is part of the neoliberal issue, neoliberal subject. You have to take cases as an individual, and you are put up in the system. But I'm talking about something negative now, which is why we have to leave, not why we should stay. But I do think that, it's the most powerful place to be, because what we are doing is shifting the knowledge, shifting the debates. I was so impressed with what you were telling me about housing and the Swiss housing market and how it's actually increasing inequality. So you've got the power to shift policies, but what needs to happen is academia needs to welcome us in.
Thank you so much, Professor Mirza, and thank you for sharing that struggle as well, and congratulations for taking yourself out of a situation that wasn't serving you or your health. I think that's a great step.
We need to talk more about mental health issues in our institutions, most definitely.
I think that could be a whole other roundtable.
Yes. Thanks a lot for putting a lot of interesting insights and food for thoughts. So we talked a lot about what worked, what did not work well, but we would like to leave the roundtable with some practical advices. So I would like to address the last question again to Professor Auriol. So there are a lot of faculty members, both men and women, that would like to be allied and would like to participate to this change. But maybe simply don't know how. To give inspiration to them, what would you advise? What would be your advice on daily basis? What can we do on daily basis?
I think, as we discussed early this morning, I think we share prejudice. That's something I discovered. And I discover not because, of course, we see ourselves differently than we are really. That's the difficulty. We don't see our own limitation. But what I saw in the statistic is that women are not better at promoting equality than men. So it's not a problem of a sex battle. It's really a problem of culture. Okay, this is something we share. So I mean, it depends on how your brain works. But the first thing I do is I read this paper, and now I know that when you do the tenure review, for instance, you are going to discount the paper inconsciously, the papers that women write with men. And you know that the committee is going to do the same. So what I did the last time I had to do a review for women, I started with the paper that was single author. And I show in my review that that was the origin of the co-author paper. That was very well published. So it's hard to say the credit is not there. Okay, so but you have to realize what are your limitations to fight them, and then try to. Then there is the role model. So we shouldn't shy away about teaching and doing a seminar, and we have to be there and to stand our ground. If someone cut you, you say no, thank you, I'm not done. I want to finish. So that's something that can help young women that are a bit wondering what they are doing there. You have to mentor. That's useful and to help young colleagues through mentoring, because it's not obvious. There are many unwritten rules in this job, and I think that's helpful. And the last thing, you can do collective action. So WINE, for instance, the Women in Economics Standing Committee of the EA, is welcoming senior women. They need senior women. It's a 3 years term, and it's demanding a bit. But that's very useful too. And so there are many things we can do. I would like to end up on something more optimistic. I must say that I'm worried for men. If you look at the statistic of higher education, it's very worrying to see in the US with the pandemic, for instance, now the share of women that go to university is over 60%. In France, in primary school, those who are dropping out and that are posing a lot of problems are boys from immigration, originally, from poor background, but with... So, I mean, women, and that's why we have this discussion today, and that's why Me Too movement arrived, is because of this massive feminization of whether there are some trees that hide the forest, but there is a massive feminization of many professions and in many jobs. And of course, when you are a lot and you are educated and you are competent, you don't accept anymore. So there are a lot of change, and also the young generation that you represent is part of that. Me at your age, I will not have organized an event like that, because I will have fear what it could do with my career, or what, because it was so not the atmosphere. So let's be a bit hopeful, and also one reason for hope is that there are a lot of boys in this room too. It's not a sex battle. It's a battle for a better society, and what everybody can feel safe.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great way to leave it off. I would say we open the floor for questions. So are there any questions in the room right now? Yeah. Is there someone with the microphone?
The microphone are on already, and I think there are some questions. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really motivational and humbling advices. So this is what we talked about when women are in economics. We are doing a PhD. But as a woman, when you enter economics, when you enter a PhD program, so let's say, for example, a person who's of color, comes from a different country, you are welcomed at the university because the place where you're welcome, they have to show diversity, which is upcoming part of the program, the change in the society. But once you enter the department and you start having problems of exclusion, or even you have small questions which you might be very hesitant to ask, So there you feel completely excluded. Secondly, you do feel you are here probably because you are here, so the university, the department gets more money. So they have a chance to show that on brochures that it is really a diversified place. But what happens inside is completely different. And you're lucky if you get a good mentor. Your colleagues and everyone is supportive. But you are very miserable if you start having problems with these mentors. So at the first, you get sympathy words from everyone around. But once you really speak up, like what I'm pointing out is the real ground reality. Once you speak up, then people do suggest you certain ways. And once you really walk to those ways, you realize you are not just against your department, then the whole university comes in. And it becomes really, and you're at the pinnacle of your career because PhD is already starting to look for a direction in life and moving in a solid direction. Then you do realize that it's just not you fighting against one particular person, department, then the whole institution steps in. And though they do tell you, we are there to help, but you get no help. And secondly, if you look out to other professors, you discover there's this underlying allyship or like the buddy system, and then you're lost. And either you fight it out, but it's at the end, you are just alone, and it's completely a lost battle unless luck favors you through something. So even though we have these policies and everything around the debate, it's coming, but when it comes to reality, facing the problem, it still is the same. Maybe a little bit more, but then it becomes, if you're an outsider, it becomes very troublesome because your colleagues start evading away from you and you're completely left alone and miserable, and then changing the whole direction of your life, like moving away from that place might be the only solution, but it breaks your personality or confidence for a very long period of time. So how do we address that as a woman? Where do we go in reality where we know at least some sort of hearing, the true hearing, the unbiased hearing will be supported for us?
Another happy question. I'll give you a happy answer. What you've just described is unfortunately so normal. I have seen so many overseas students that have been treated so poorly by their supervisors, by the whole system. And there is a sense in which I know they feel collectively that the universities in the Western world are taking their money. And this is what it's about. And as soon as they get the fees, your excess to need, really, and you don't get that support. But what has worked for my graduate students is that they have, you could be picked off so easily, one by one. This is what I was talking about, the neoliberal condition and learning and the PhD processes itself is actually very isolating. And so we need to build networks. And we haven't talked about, we talked about safe spaces, but networks are very important. And this is a network here that you're building, which is so important. And you need to have, maybe, it was so interesting, people used to say to me when I was having difficulties in institutions, oh, go and see so-and-so, another woman of color. Like, I would just automatically like somebody because they're the same color as me, or the same gender as me, or whatever. So it isn't that easy to form good networks across divides, racial divides, ethnic divides, religious divides, every gender divides, sexuality divides, not everybody can coexist. But if you can help each other and read each other's work, because these networks can't just be meeting shops to waste your good time, just to have a cup of tea. They have to actually maybe read each other's work, maybe get feedback. And this is the cheek of the system, because actually the supervisors and the university's taking the money, but you have to go outside of the university for that support, or to your fellow students for that support. One of the things we haven't talked about is this one-to-one relationship with supervisors in the PhD process. It can be very intense or very disappointing. And one of the things that I've written about is the sexual harassment that happens in that one-to-one relationship with women, particularly women with, male, quite predatory, because they're powerful. They have the say in what goes and what doesn't go. And there is, relationships can develop, maybe out of choice, but often not out of choice. And so the book Sarah Armer's just written about complaint is that a group of us actually resigned from a particular college because the university refused to discipline a very senior professor who had a whole group of men under his command, and they were serially affecting the women. So this is something I think that as women we have to talk about, the ingrained sexual harassment and the power relationship with the supervisor. Another happy topic, but a very important one to talk about. It's a hidden one.
Another thing what I saw and discovered was, even though there are departments to help you, their only excuse to tell you is that because he's a so-and-so professor, he's federally or she's federally employed, the university cannot fire and the university cannot take a bad reputation. So no matter what committees we form, however, if the law doesn't change, and it's very difficult to prove something against a professor, if he's really done something wrong to you in whatever manner, not just sexual harassment, there could be other types of abuses as well. So this is where you lose the ground. And this is where I think a policy should also direct towards, like, there should be real grievances, real consequences, and there should be real enlightenment within the professors themselves that what they can really go through. And it's only the institution, I think, that can help.
I mean, maybe if I can just quickly react to that, I think what we need to get to is a point in time where not pursuing a complaint like that is riskier in terms of reputation than pursuing it, right?
Yeah.
That's really what needs to happen.
There's one thing that the university is very frightened of, and it's their reputation, because they need students and they have to maintain. And we found this in this particular university, that was our kingpin play, is the reputation of the university. But they make the students sign non-disclosure agreements if there's any untoward behavior, whether it's not just sexual, but it could be also stealing your work, because remember, you're on the cutting edge of your topic. And often older professors are at the dying embers of theirs. And, your work becomes what feeds them and enables them to stay in very high-paid positions. So there is a whole dynamic of gender relations, power, and prestige all bundled up in there. But do seek support from other powerful women, networks, and I think what we do have on our side at the moment is social media, because we could use that to quite powerful effects.
I think there was another question.
Thank you. So maybe I'll remove this. So thanks a lot. That was a very interesting panel and conference in general. I have a question pertaining to the safe space. So I totally take the point, having been in conference where you have to elbow your way to a question and things like that. Yet at the same time, the confrontation of ideas is part of academia. And you have to argue also to policy, you have to sit sometimes in a meeting and you argue such policy and someone else wants another one. And this confrontation can be pleasant by nature. You realize that there's something you may have overlooked. So, and because how do we do to ensure that it's a safe space while at the same time not stifling this confrontation that is part of the job and our students have to be equipped to handle for their careers? Thanks.
I think so.
You are the world specialist of safe space.
Yeah, safe spaces, as I said earlier, are hot topics, controversial topics. It's part of the culture wars at the moment. But, Universities and academic freedom, the freedom to say what you want to say, the freedom to express yourself, even if those ideas are obnoxious, maybe racist, sexist, discriminatory. There's a tradition that can be said. I've sat in a lecture where there have been professors very highly ranked talking about the lower IQ of people from Africa or people of color. And that is offensive to me. I have a choice to walk out. I have a choice to stand up and speak out. I have a choice to ask the university to protect me as well. So all those three elements, speaking out, asking for protection, and answering back, they don't solve the problem. He's not going to go away. He's not going to stop his ideas, but I can build up a momentum of people who think differently. Having a safe space, it's difficult. I'll give you an example. I was in a tutorial group, I was organizing it, and we were talking about diversity, and one of the young men there, he was a science graduate. He had a master's in, I think, in biology, and he was on a teacher training. He was training to be a teacher, and he made the statement in the group that he teaches young black boys in schools, and he knows that they are of a lower end. He's convinced that skin color is related to your academic intelligence. So here's a person who, maybe for 35 years has been educated in a white British education system. He doesn't know that is actual pseudoscience, nonsense. It's racist. And the other students, argued against him. And he stood up on the point of tears and he said that he's the victim now. And this is what we're seeing increasingly, that people who might have offensive ideas, become the victim, and it's all about them. And that's what happened. It became all about him, but not about the offense that he was bringing upon the others. So the dynamics of a safe space are very hard when you're a tutor. And what I found amongst some research I was doing, looking at issues of Islamophobia and the extent to which if something came up around Muslims and the dress of women or Afghanistan or you name it, a lot of the tutors will not talk about it because they were afraid of being shouted down. So we need to find a balance between the freedom of expression and creating a safe space. And I think that as tutors, lecturers, students, we all have a responsibility to listen to each other, even if it's difficult, and then agree to differ or walk out. It's a very difficult situation. I know the universities, there's issues of no platforming. Do you know this? No platforming. So if somebody is very, has transphobic ideas, this is a big one that's been happening in the UK, and have been invited by a certain group to come and speak at the university. There's students have said that the university should no platform them. They should have no platform. They shouldn't even be allowed. And this is about the freedom of speech. Should they be allowed or should they have no platform? Because the transgender people feel unsafe in the space, and the university has a responsibility to protect them. So again, I don't know. It's open to question. What do you think? Should we ban people, or should we allow them to speak, very offensive things to disadvantaged people, people of color, transgender people, disabled people, is it about power? Who should speak? What do you think?
Should I? Well,
yeah, that's the tough one. My rule would be that any engagement has to be done with respect of people on the rest of the audience. So someone would come, like the example you give, to me are over the lines. For instance, like the IQ and skin color. But in my question, I was thinking, not to this extreme, but what I'm concerned sometimes from reading the press is to situations like, if I'm a debate and someone disagrees with me, that's already getting out of the safe space. But debating is part, and even without going to the cases you get there, but how do I go in a room where I'm comfortable have someone saying, no, I disagree with you, and to have to define UID? Because this confrontation is part of the job of academia and in policy circle. And it has to take place. It's not always fun. And I'm talking about, for instance, arguing about economic policies. So something that can be much more mundane, but sometimes can be quite heated arguments. So how can we have this take place while preserving the safety space that no one feels like, I don't even belong here?
I would say that, when you have your economic arguments and people come from different perspectives, one of the things is that you go away and you write a good paper. Based on that challenge. I mean, I've been horribly challenged, especially when I had just finished my PhD, by some very aggressive male academics. And I just went home. I cried under the duvet, under the blanket for a week. And then I got up and I thought, no, I'm going to smash you back. And I wrote the best things that I've written. So there's a sense in which you've got to, we need to have maybe some unsafeness in a safe space, but then we need to find places of sanctuary, and maybe we need to call it that. Like this, feels like a place of sanctuary. I don't know if everybody agrees or disagrees, but we're being respectful. And maybe if you disagree, you'll go away and include it in your work somehow, or think about it. But I agree, we shouldn't ban people.
Can I just add a comment? Because to me, the notion of a safe space does not exclude confrontation of an intellectual nature at all, actually. It makes it even more possible. That's why we need it, so we actually have that exchange, and people like me can stop being intimidated for being personally attacked. I think for me that is the notion of a safe space where I'm actually free to disagree with people and not, worry about retaliation of any sort. So I think, to me, that situation that you described as heated discussion about economic policies, where views can diverge quite a bit, that can happen in a safe space, as long as it doesn't get personal, as long as someone doesn't say, you only have that opinion because you're a woman, or because you have an immigration background or something like this. I think for me, there's that line.
Totally agree.
Could I just make one more point? Sorry, I hope I'm not hogging this side. There's another side to talking about safe spaces. What happens a lot with in universities and just institutions in general, what they say is that you could set up your own migrant network, or LBGT plus network, or whatever, gender network, so that you feel safe in those spaces. Now, the problem with that, again, is that it's good. We can build strength amongst ourselves and share our experiences. That's empowering. But what is disempowering is that we are not connected sometimes to other mainstream white male clubs. So we have our own club, and we are told that's good, that's positive, we'll get some money if and the university will fund you. But really, power, systemic power, runs through who you know and the powerful networks. there was some research done in Johns Hopkins University that talked about the strength of weak ties, meaning literally the old school tie that people might share. So that if you went to Yale or Harvard, for example, and you go for a job, and the person that's interviewing you is also from Yale or Harvard, you'll probably get that job because they recognize themselves in you. So they feel comfortable. They know your background. They know who you are. So that so networks are important, terribly important in academia, who you know and who will listen to you. So setting up separate groups has a limited shelf life. Then you need to move across institutions in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can see if there's some questions.
I think there are questions from the
there is
online
one question
audience.
From the Zoom chat. So Shishi Roy is addressing this question to all panelists. Could you maybe propose any policy implications for backward caste women in India, where she was born into a family where men were denied human rights as well?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. So the question goes as follows. Could you maybe propose any policy implications for backward caste women in India, where she was born into a family where men were denied human rights as well? I think he means the lower caste families where men don't share the equal rights with upper caste men, and the women, we don't need to even speak of that. Yeah. So how can we improve that situation?
So is that regarding a double layer of disadvantage, comparing disadvantaged
Yeah, exactly.
women with
It's a double tier
disadvantaged men, and
disadvantage.
that
The
there's
caste
a
and the
fairness
sex
problem?
disadvantage, both.
Yeah, if you have ideas. Yeah.
Well, I can make a start on it, and then my colleagues can join. But I think that that raises a very important question about class and caste. And when we're talking about women in academia and men in academia, it's often more middle class and elite groups that are thriving in higher education, rather than working class people and lower caste people, whether they're women or men. And so we often don't talk enough about class, and you as economists should know about socioeconomic groups and in your work. And it's very important because the poverty gaps are growing immensely, and especially with COVID. So inequalities in housing and health have been shown on the spotlight around class and caste in India. So I'm just starting this conversation off, so I don't know if you would like to pick up.
No, but maybe just, I don't know if it's not about caste system or class, but it makes me think about my PhD student research on the intersection of two factors, or disability and gender. And one of the findings that she has is that the sum of disabilities, the sum of disadvantages is larger than the disadvantage of the disadvantage of the sum is larger than the sum of disadvantages. So maybe that speaks a little bit to this intersection, but I don't have any other, maybe just one point.
It's hard to add anything on that, the subadditivity of disadvantages. So, no, I have no, I didn't study so this problem. So I have nothing. I would like just to come back a bit about a safe space, and I think university have a duty there to say what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in terms of behavior in rooms. When someone talks, you listen. You don't cut the person because you think necessarily he's stupid because he's black or because that's not okay. And there are stuff we can do collectively. That's not okay. I was really impressed at the World Bank where this problem has been documented. You see the wage of people at the World Bank, you negotiate your wage, so it's white male, etc., until you end to a black woman, the pay grade. So there are a lot of problems. And they produce this thing, and in meeting it works. I never saw someone cutting someone else on the ground that he was black, woman, or transgender, or whatever. And then you can disagree. You can disagree all you want, but that's something. And to come back to what you said, I think here again that university can do something, because if you have a rule of how, for instance, if you have 2 mentors. It's a rule. In Toulouse, we introduce that. I think it's very healthy to have 2 mentors. It's a rule. We have also very advanced PhD class, which autonomize students. So if your advisor is really bad, you can do. You have been at the frontier of and all the students. So there are stuff an university can do to make the place safer, I think, for the people that are, and especially the students that are coming there. And if something very inappropriate happens, illegal even, usually it's not only you. If someone is badly behaving, presumably this person will badly behave with other people. So it's good to talk and to try to find sometimes it's a really idiosyncratic shock, but for instance, sexual harassment, typically, they are serial sexual harassers. And so it's hard to say, one, you can always say it's word against word, but if you have several people, like in Weinstein case, zillion of women say exactly the same thing. Well, maybe they are just colluding, but maybe they are also... So there are stuff we can, I think, do.
Can I just come back on that question, because one of the things I don't know about in Switzerland, but in Britain we have like a 2-tier systems of university. We have what we call the Russell Group, which are the top universities, LSE, UCL, Oxford, Cambridge, whatever. And then we have the old polytechnics that became universities that where the working class people go. So this is the thing. I'm now working at the Institute of Fiscal Studies with all these brilliant young economists on the Angus Deaton review of inequality. Angus Deaton, the Nobel Prize winning economist. And so, and what is quite clear, and it's no surprise, is that the Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Caribbean, and African people go to the lower tier of universities, cities very politely, and their parents save up. They're now high fees. They put their whole livelihoods into their children. They will sacrifice everything and pay these phenomenally high fees. The same price as in the fees are the same as in the elite universities. And they're getting half the standard, because when they leave, they do not get the jobs. So even if they get good degrees from those universities, it does not translate into the labor market. They're getting lower wages or possibly no job at all. So there's an ethnic penalty, we call it, which is very strong. And so they're not getting value for money, but they're still going, because the idea of social mobility through education is the only route for migrant people in these countries and in poverty. So they will sacrifice everything for that, often making the wrong choices of subject areas. This is another thing we're finding. They will choose business studies, because they, or computing studies, or medicine. And they don't know about the whole range of subjects that they can choose. So the subject choice we make, they'll never think of economics. It's just because I think the parents can't tell their friends that they're a doctor, lawyer, or an accountant. So, because they just don't know about it. So the pipeline you were talking about in your lecture it goes right down from the school level, from the community level, right up, looking through opportunities. And if economics is an area that needs people, there will be brilliant people in the Dalit community. There will be brilliant people from working class communities of every nationality. But they need to know about it. So we need to also, in these groups like this, have outreach to communities where we can educate and they can learn about the opportunities that an economics degree can give them.
Thank you so much. So I think we have a few more questions in the room. Like there was one here, and there are also some. Maybe we can collect a few at a time and then answer them together because we're running a little bit out of time.
Thank you. I would like to ask Professor Auriol about one specific lesson learned that you mentioned. So you mentioned several of them, what worked, what didn't work when we were trying to promote equality among genders. I realized that I know most of these lessons from my own life or from discussions with other female economists. So I would like to ask about the one where you talk about representation of women in different committees, where you say, well, now 50% of committees should be women, and then of course, if women are underrepresented, this creates a disproportionate burden for women, and then they basically do more or provide more public goods, which we know is very often the case. Now my question is, I think in France the departments are a bit more balanced, but there are places where the departments are fully male and then maybe one woman comes in. Now, how do we strike the right balance? If this woman doesn't sit in the committees, I'm not saying in all the committees, but in the important ones, then no woman is at the table. Our experiences are not taken into account in any way whatsoever. At the same time, if she goes to the committees, then she as an individual has a disadvantage, right? So if she goes, she helps the group, but she as a person is punished in a way. So what do? Do we take it into account when the decision about her tenure is made? Do we take into account how many committees she was attending, or people in general are attending, of course? Because it's very important to be at these tables, and it's if there is a homogeneous group, then experiences of other people are never going to be taken into account and nothing can ever be changed. So what would you say would be possibly a way out if we are starting really from, let's say, very male-dominated departments?
Thank you very much. That's true that I was a bit quick on my advice, or at least for department, because it was the issue there. We have data that shows that it's very important that women sit on recruiting committee. That has been proved. The decisions are not exactly the same. Simply because the men change behavior when there is a woman. They pay more attention, and so that's it. It change. It's not necessarily the woman; it's herself. As I mentioned again and again, we are sharing prejudice, but simply the fact that there is a woman suddenly. So I think there's committees that are very strategic and where very strategic decisions are taken, especially hiring and promotion. So I think if you have to sit on a committee, the recruiting one is a very important one. But also, and I totally concur to what was said before, many people will expect you to sit on committee about, I don't know, stuff that have nothing to do with advancing your career. So someone has to sit in this committee, but it cannot be the same woman sitting in all of them. And that's it. So it's good to have that in mind, and also the department should have that in mind. At TSC, what we do with the junior faculties, they do only stuff that are good for their career. All of them, not specifically men or women. So they organize seminars, so they meet with the speakers, that's good for them. They teach a bit, but not too much, and they don't sit in committee at all. So they organize things, they contribute to the institution. So so you have to choose wisely, but that's true when there is one woman and only men, you have to do your share. That's for sure. And I repeat, and you don't want to be a free rider. It's not a good role model. It's not. So that's a delicate balance, I think. But be aware that sitting on too many of them, well, there are different careers also. I think everybody should, especially in Europe, where the market is so fragmented, you can have very interesting career doing different things. And so some person, men or women, they really love being in management. And I mean, it's very interesting also. You can impact the university. So, but if, and the focus of this conference was academia. So in academia, you have to publish and to get promoted. So that's something we have to bear in mind. And I think the institution should help by internalizing all this research and that prove that overbordering women with committees is not a good idea at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it working? Thank you for a very interesting and stimulating panel discussion. I have two points on which I would like to hear your thoughts. One is that among the measures or the practical things that work, you said there's mentoring and there's white allies. I really like that the term of having a white ally. I think it's a very good, it's a very powerful message there. But then I was wondering whether these are more like individual solutions rather than coming from the top, a macro level solution, because of course one person can have a white ally, another person can have a good mentor and other things, but what would you say if you want to look at it from a top down? And ultimately it's a power game, right? It's people in power who need to change, and we said the leaders need to change. So what could be a macro level solution for people to power, the systemic change to happen? I mean, in governments we see kind of protests or movements or big movements. So is there anything that can help at that level? That was one of my points on which I would like to have your thoughts. And the other one is that so far we've been talking about gender equality and diversity and everything in the same basket. That is there a solution that is the same solution, because gender means at least 50%, let's say, of the population is there. Whereas in other ethnic or diversity groups, then you don't have even that 50%. So if 50% is a solution works for a group which is represented by 50% of the population, would the same solution work for another minority which is only represented by 20% or 15%? So is it a one size fits all, or do we need to think about the particular factors that discriminate, the particular discriminatory factors, and will that be dependent on that? Thank you.
Maybe on the first question, I'll say a word. You're asking how leadership can change and how can it come from the top in a systematic way. I think you're right that there is going to be self-reinforcing practices or persistent practices that are overarching, even if individuals find strategies. I guess two ways that I see this leadership changing. One is students demanding it. Students can be a very important, I think about students, not just PhD students, but undergrad students asking for changes in many things, and they are young people, so they're going to be wanting to have these changes. And when students are voicing concerns, I think that leadership will listen, especially if the funding is, of course, related to students and attractiveness. And the other is funders as well. I mean, funding support can also be tied to and quality labels and other things. So both stakeholders of the academic world and funding, I think, can be ways that lead to leaders to self-examine themselves, or at least even if they don't self-examine themselves, to put in place changes that are not at the individual level, but at the school level or broader level. Yeah, so just.
Were there other questions? Or maybe did you want to?
I was just going to. It's a very important question because, you know, most of the solutions are about representation, putting a woman here and, you know, a person of color there and feeling good about it. That's what our institutions do. And then they put us on the brochures usually and to attract overseas students, but and show that they're diverse, but nothing really has been happening systemically and integrally to the institution. I think one of the things is about the concept of quality and quality control in our universities. So the university system is, I used the word medieval before because that's when the whole system began, and you know, the idea of isolation and focusing down on a topic and the whole sort of structure of higher education still has those roots in it. And that's what needs to change. I've mentioned peer review, the idea of excellence and quality, and that anything else is not quality. And I think it's so fundamental. The change has to be so big. We have to shift the landscape. I call it the eduscape. You know, we have to shift that landscape so that people, diverse people, gendered people, raced people, disabled people can come into that space and bring with them a whole wonderful range of diversity that means thinking differently, other ways of knowing, other ways of being. At the moment, we're allowed in as women only if we mimic men, only if we mimic their system. So yes, we're allowed in, but on their terms. And we're still, you know, the way that we have to, what we have to achieve, what we have to write, the way we have to write it, it's been laid down for millennia. Well, not a whole millennia, but a couple of 100 years. And so we have to think of maybe not being so competitive, you know, the metrics that we have put in place. We have to shift that ground, but of course we've got too much invested in it personally, financially. You know, our market, the students want to come because of the high standard that it is, and the standard is only measured through particular metrics. So I don't know how. I know that the new universities I was talking about earlier, they're softer places, less, but more inclusive, but not seen to have such a high standard. So we have to decouple the idea of high standards with a particular brutality that goes with it. And maybe gendered bodies in those spaces make them more loving and caring. And I don't mean that in a kind of patronizing, only women could, you know, love and make places softer and more caring and more embracing. But actually we don't talk about love enough. Because what we do as teachers and as mentors is actually care, but there's no metric for caring. You know, there's no value in it in the system. We value it as women and as, you know, I call it being transformative agents. We are dealing with knowledge. We are passing on that knowledge. In a system of reciprocity, giving back and taking, and that is a real act of care and love. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but other than to say, we need to rethink those things and give them value.
Yeah, I think there are stuff we can do, and I try to point at some of them, and institutions should do. But it will be, it will not, there is not a big push. I think, well, there are, of course, it's very important that women can vote. They couldn't in France after the war, that they can have their own bank account. They couldn't until, I don't know, the 70s. So this thing matters a great deal. But also, so you have the collective action, but you have also all the things we mentioned at the individual level. And this is a conjunction of all these things that makes society move. Me, okay, I am the optimistic, although I was very depressing this morning. I am the optimistic type. I mean, if you look at what, I don't know, but my mom, she quit school at 13 or 15, I mean, and she could vote, but her mom couldn't vote, and she couldn't have a bank account. And look, 60%. Me, I am worried for boy, actually, but society has evolved so quickly. We have prime minister. So there are a lot of hope for more gender balanced society. It's not over yet, and there is Afghanistan, obviously, but. And so it's a bit messy. This is my answer. I think it's both internally, it's at the institution level, it's in interaction, it's in network. So you have to push it, yes, like that. But it's coming, I think.
I think there's so many things one could say after your responses. It's super interesting. I think there was another question here and over there as well. Maybe we can bundle the two, so you say them and then we answer.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Okay. First, a very quick thank you to all the organizers, Federica and Laura, for example, of this, for organizing this conference and especially this workshop, and to all the professors for being here. So my question relates to something that Prof. Mirza mentioned a few times already. Is about metrics, but my question is addressed to all of you. So the sense is that you explained that the metrics are designed with male privilege in taking into account male privilege, and they're not conducive to the success of people who are not male, not white, for example, coming from different genders, different discriminated communities. So there are two problems, and I would like to get your opinions on both. First of all, is that what do you think could drive change for these metrics, and how do you see new forms of metrics taking place that it's not just peer review, for example. And then the second thing is that, if you're from a minority or a discriminated group, if there are personal reasons that you could not succeed in meeting these metrics, your performance is affected by personal idiosyncratic factors, you have this sense of failure, not just that you're failing as a person in not meeting this metric, but you're letting down your entire gender, your entire ethnic or cultural group, because you're representing basically all of them, because there are probably not going to be another person representing the same groups in the places where you're inhabiting. So I'd like to get your opinions on both these aspects. Thank you.
All right, I will try to be really, really quick. So my question is, as an outsider, how can you actually distinguish between, let's say, a truly inclusive department and an inclusive department on the paper? So someone already mentioned that often there are, let's say, top-down targets from, let's say, the top level of the institution, and you can often see the job descriptions that women are strongly encouraged to apply, and when you apply, you already know that there is a certain chance that you have high probability to get a position, but as a candidate, you don't really want to be hired because just you're a woman. You want to be hired as a researcher, as the one who will be like the person who will like share the ideas and bring like new research pipeline to the department. So maybe any tips, ideas, what to look for would be great. Thank you.
On this point, I think this is why women are not very keen on quota, because they feel that it's not fair to their talent and contribution to say that they've been there because of the gender, and that's why that was something that was mentioned, and that men are more convinced about the usefulness of it. So that's true, but on the other hand, I was very struck by what you said. How do you define succeeding when the game is totally fixed?
The game is fixed.
Yeah. That's a very that's something we have to think about. So if the game is and we know in economics there are problems, really, we know that. I think also about this metric stuff, it's not even rational, but we are losing money, for instance, at the European level, at the ERC level, because of the overwhelming weight put on the top 5 journal. So the profession, I'm very old, and so when I started, there was no internet. And when I completed my PhD, there was internet. So it changed totally the way we do. And contrary to, and it's a very interesting IO question, but contrary to what you might expect, this suddenly increase in competition due to innovation has made the profession even more conservative. And there is also this hash index that now you can click and see. So it means you want to be quoted as an editor, so there are fashion, and you have in some journal all the same people publishing the same type of stuff. So you have all this network thing. That's strange because it should have opened the game, and in some sense it has. So people from all over the planet can contribute. But so I think as a profession, it's insane. We are an applied profession, okay? So why on earth only 5 journals when the number of economists has increased but dramatically should matter for career? I mean, in the US, if you don't have a top 5, you don't get tenure. Huh? That's why it's cutthroating. Huh? So that's an interesting issue, and that's a bit a puzzle for me. So I think so one good argument I hear that I can understand was that editors suddenly were overflowed by a paper from countries they don't know. They don't know the method, because we know that some people are cooking the data. That's forgery exists in research. Huh? And so what they say, well, I prefer to take someone from the US. I know the data are clean. So in other words, the noise increase because of globalization and this new arrival, but then it makes this profession even more close and conservative. So, and that's, but honestly, focusing on 5 journals when we are thousands and thousands and thousands. So, and there is also something very masculine here, I think, which is a status thing. Okay, you know, I did it. Okay, that's so. And that creates a very unhealthy game where you have to know the editor to please them, etc. So there is, and it's not okay. If we were singer, I can understand that only the best. We don't need to hear me. I prefer to hear a disc of someone. You produce, but we are an applied science. There are needs of paper and work all over the planet. There are data everywhere, so we need to make room for everybody, for good work to go through. And that's something, but it's yes, it's hard to change. That I can see.
Yeah, well, you had, I think, 2 questions, right? The drivers of change for I mean, again, but maybe back to the students, the drivers of change for metrics. Maybe there are also students and society when we have like these more informal indices or informal way new metrics can emerge, I think, from the students somehow in terms of how inclusive a school is, or in some online way, and these things can also be drivers for change at the school level. And then the school may put more emphasis on the professors to act in a certain way because they know that otherwise it's a bit the reputation, but the reputation can be formalized somehow into certain inclusion metrics that could emerge, I think. And the other point about failure and representing the entire group, I think that's putting a lot of burden on oneself. I mean, I don't know who I was asking this question. Sorry. Yes, it's a great question, but certainly then you put a big burden on yourself or oneself if thinking about that. So.
first person to represent that group in the organization that you are invited to attend, and so you feel like, and it's probably true on a psychological level, that people are saying, okay, we invited this person from this group, and they are not successful, so they will be more hesitant to hire another person from the same group.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and I think it relates also to the question before about having just one woman in the committee. How is she going to act? Maybe Heidi, you have a comment on that?
No, I have a comment. I think thinking about what the two of you, there's a connection between what the two of you are saying, and you raised this topic about the imposter syndrome, which is a very strong thing. It is the burden that we have as minorities, whether it's gendered minorities or people of color or disabled or LGBT. So you have a sense in which you don't belong, and if you have that sense of not belonging and never being good enough, because the system actually tells you this, because I'll give you an example. When I got my chair, an older white male professor in the same university, he leaned over, and we were celebrating, as it were. It was a special event because I was coming, and he had a drink in his hand, and he leaned over and he said, they're giving chairs to anybody for anything these days. And he was implying that because I was a woman of color and it's a chair in race equality, that it was like a quota. It was a special favor. It's because he was saying I was in the right place at the right time and I'm just got lucky. And I carried that with me for years and years. It was like a little, what you call this, a worm in my head. And it was always, I felt that I was never good enough, because maybe he's right. Maybe I was only there because there was a special chair, and I would have not got it if I was an economist or something else. I got it in race equality, and so I carried that to the point where I couldn't anymore. And then when I gave it up, I did feel that burden that I'm letting my side down, my peeps. I'm letting my peeps down and my girls down, because, this is meant to be this, wonderful opportunity. But if the rules of the game are stacked against you, and you can't get the funding, you can't get the publications for all the reasons we've talked about, because the metrics that are used reinforce your failure. If you fail to get, so many publications in 5 years, we have the research assessment exercises. Every 5 years you have to have certain levels of journals and articles and so on. And if you're ill, if you have a child, if you have elder care, we haven't even talked about that. That is something that's very big. You have all those expectations on you that it's really hard to meet those requirements. But then you have to say to yourself, who set those requirements? It is to privilege, it is only elite privilege, and usually men, not always. There are many women now in very senior positions. And it's quite interesting that many of them have chosen not to have children, because you can't have children in these jobs, and or it makes it very difficult to succeed. So I think that the imposter syndrome is a very powerful one for feeling that that you're not good enough, but you always are, because every single thing that you write, every single thing that you think, and everything that you pass on is a new idea. It doesn't have to be in the top journal, and this is why I love things like open access and other ways of publishing, and using social media in other ways, because your ideas still matter.
just because they're not in a top journal, which have been, of course, policed by the mafia. It doesn't mean that what you're saying, I mean, what you all were talking today about, climate change, was fascinating. It was so powerful, and the relationship between investment and climate change. I mean, it's only because you're of this generation that you care enough to put all your resources in that areas of research and come out with fascinating ideas, because you can see the world in other ways of knowing, other ways of being, because you're women, because you're probably working class, because you're women of color. You know about inequalities in a way that, the dinosaurs at the top don't know, because that's not their world. So you bring a freshness that actually answers the questions of the time. And it's, these journals will implode if they don't include those ideas in it, but then just publish in other ways. And yes, you might not get tenure, but you will be disseminating knowledge, and that's what we do. We have to disseminate knowledge, even if there are barriers, so you never can fail, because every idea that you have will go into policy somehow. Maybe you won't work in a university, maybe you'll work in a policy-making arena, or teach kids in school is so important about economics. And that's the one thing that I'm beginning to understand, is that our curriculum in schools doesn't teach children about banking and investment and economics at all. They do maths that is almost meaningless and so difficult I can't do it. There's so many areas. So you could never fail. Paulo Freire, who is a very great educationalist from Brazil, he said, to speak one word of truth is all it takes to make a revolution. So, one word of truth, which is what you've done today, in your things, will make a revolution. You just have to find the roots to express it and for the world to know about it. Yeah.
Me, well, you shouldn't change career. If you want to be at the university, you have to stick to it, I think. You don't give up on your dream. To be honest, you have been there so far, and you arrived already here. So you have been already, all of you, overcome a lot of challenges. But that's true that when you are the first, you have some kind of responsibility, and that's why role model, this is the idea of role model. You have this suggests you have a responsibility, otherwise. So, but on the other hand, everybody has limitations, fails, etc. And so you have to. Me, something that helped me a great deal, and that was a colleague that told me that. So. I don't know, once I got some awards at TSC, so I make a speech, and it was a PhD first day, and so I make a very feminist speech. And I say it's a tough job, etc. And a colleague came, and I like this guy a lot, and he tapped my shoulder and said, "Oh, nice speech, Emmanuelle, but it's tough for boys too." And then I realized that I've been a bit paranoid also. Sometimes we blame our gender, but there are dimensions of the job that are difficult. So that's and that's true for everybody. So we are not perfect, but indeed, if you are in a position you have a responsibility. But everybody has a responsibility. So you shouldn't be overburdened by it. You are not the anti-woman representation, the anti-black representation, etc. But it's true that to change things, this come back to it's a piling of little things, and so pushing the wall, I think, but without being too harsh on yourself.
I would say that, embodied in academia is a cruel deceit. Do you know what I mean by that? It's a cruel idea that we can all make it to professor, because many of you won't, but maybe one of you will, or two of you will, because that's the idea of the career and the idea of what is success is, it's like a pyramid. You know, we have to climb to the top of this pyramid. The pinnacle of the top is, you know, maybe your PhD. I remember thinking of a mountain. I used to dream about a mountain when I was doing my PhD. And when I got to the top and I did the PhD, I looked down and I thought, what is it all about, you know? And then you go, well, I'll go up the mountain even higher and I'll become a lecturer, associate professor. I'll go up to the professor. Not everybody could do it. That's not, you know, other skill sets matter. So, you know, I don't want to say that you won't, because you might be the one that gets through, but the whole system is designed that only a few can reach the top. And that is the capitalist system of education. That's our idea of meritocracy. That is our idea of success. And so it's a cruel deceit. It's inbuilt to give you lack of confidence. If you don't make it, like you're saying, you feel like a failure. So you live with that failure. But it's not. It's just the definition of success is so pinnacled, always going higher and higher. But actually, maybe satisfaction is at the bottom. Just being, just loving, caring, whatever. Why can't that be success too?
But you need to eat, huh?
Yeah, you have a job.
You need to eat and to have a job most of the time. So
I'm not saying,
because we divorced also. I remind.
I'm not saying give it up. I'm just saying understand the realities of it. You know.
I think we're getting into super interesting conversations that go a little bit beyond the roundtable. So I think we can continue those over dinner. But
yeah, with cheese. I mean,
no cheese. No cheese.
Killing the cheese. No, you cannot. And that I promise. Okay, the beef we can discuss, but the cheese.
Yeah. Should we? Yeah. I think I'm sorry to the online community for not having taken many questions. Feel free to send them anyway, so we will try to maybe, I don't know, address them one way or the other. But for now, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your views and personal stories. That was amazing. And yeah, I learned so much.
Yeah. So I suggest a round of applause for the organizer, because she did very well. Congrats.
Yeah, and thanks a lot to the Women in Econ Léman team that is here, that is supporting us. Thanks a lot. And